Chapter 48. Good and Evil Relationships. Leviticus 20, 10-21. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbour's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. And the man that lieth with his father's wife hath uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. And if a man lie with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have wrought confusion, their blood shall be upon them. If a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination, they shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. And if a man take a wife and her mother, it is wickedness, they shall be burnt with fire, both he and they, that there be no wickedness among you. And if a man lie with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast. And if a woman approach unto any beast and lie down thereto, thou shalt kill the woman and the beast, they shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. And if a man shall take his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and see her nakedness, and she see his nakedness, it is a wicked thing, and they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He hath uncovered his sister's nakedness, he shall bear his iniquity. And if a man shall lie with a woman having her sickness, and shall uncover her nakedness, he hath discovered her fountain, and she hath uncovered the fountain of her blood, and both of them shall be cut off from among their people. And thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister, nor of thy father's sister, for he uncovereth his near kin, they shall bear their iniquity. And if a man shall lie with his uncle's wife, he hath uncovered his uncle's nakedness, they shall bear their sin, they shall die childless. And if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing, he hath uncovered his brother's nakedness, they shall be childless. As we have seen, biblical culture is family-based. There are no laws of treason against the state, because treason is seen as action against the peace and unity of the family. As a result, there is a penalty of death for treason against the family, whereas in modern culture treason is an offence against the state. Offences against the family are seen as less and less important, and by many are acts denied the status of offence. For modern man, the biblical law of treason is primitive and barbaric. From the perspective of biblical law, to make treason an offence against the state is implicitly totalitarian and socially destructive. Sin in our era has been politicized. The law of treason is indicative of this. The family has been replaced by the state, and offences against the family are being dropped by the law as a multitude of new sins against the state are invented almost daily. God has been replaced by the state. According to 1 John 3:4, sin is the transgression of the law of God, but sin is now seen as the transgression of the law of the state. Politicizing sin tells us that the state is the new God whose laws must not be transgressed. With this in mind, let us turn to the text. To see one's nakedness is a term used in these laws, meaning to consummate a sexual union. Capital crimes here include 1. Adultery, verse 10, Leviticus 18:20, Deuteronomy 22:22. 2. Incest or sexual union with close kin, verses 11-14, Leviticus 18:7 and 8, 15:17. 3. Homosexuality, verse 13, Leviticus 18:22, and 4. Bestiality, verses 15 and 16, Exodus 22:19, Leviticus 18:23. In cases of bestiality, the animal was also killed. This latter was a common offence in antiquity, and often a religious act. In the 1970s, homosexual periodicals in San Francisco advertised a variety of trained animals for bestiality. The offences cited in verses 17 to 21 are punished by God's intervention. However, when God moves against an entire culture, the particular offences are dealt with in the general judgment. The term abomination means offensive to God and to man, filthy, repugnant, and detestable. Wickedness here is a Hebrew word, zimah, meaning unchastity, adultery, incest, and, as a figure of speech, idolatry. The word childless in verses 20 and 21 comes from a root meaning stripped. It may mean stripped of posterity, having no legal son, so that children of such a union were illegitimate. A curious fact in verse 17 is the word wicked, a translation of chesed. Normally, chesed means loyal kindness when it refers to human relationships. God's chesed is his covenantal relationship towards his people. It is a result of his covenant promise and oath. It is based on God's grace and represents his loyalty to his people. Chesed means loyalty, mutual aid, or reciprocal love. In cases involving people, the chesed relationship exists where God's law governs a. Relatives by blood or marriage, related clans and related tribes. b. Host and guest. c. Allies and their relatives. d. Friends. e. Ruler and subject. f. Those who have gained merit by rendering aid, and the parties thereby put under obligation. Thus, where loyalty and love exist in a godly relationship which is governed by God's law, chesed has a good meaning. Where the love or loyalty is evil, as in the cases of incest cited in verse 17, then love or chesed is evil. It is then translated as wicked or as sin. For example, righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14:34. Love, thus, can be good or evil, depending on its relationship to God's law. Loyalty and love outside of God's law are evil. Sexual acts without the sanction of God's law, in particular with, for example, an uncle's wife or a brother's wife, are called uncovering the nakedness of the uncle or brother. Because the sexual act makes man and wife one flesh, Genesis 2:23, a woman's nakedness is also her husband's, and a husband's nakedness is his wife's. In some cultures, permission to use a wife or husband is regularly granted, as though marriage were no more than a personal contract between two parties. Because marriage is God's ordination for his creatures and for his purposes, no human agreement outside his law has any validity. Hence, all such unions have no legal status, nor do the children born of them. As Lange noted, obedience to God's law is required simply because it is his will. This fact points to an important distinction. In the modern era, particularly since John Locke, the primary purpose of secular humanistic law has been to protect life and property. In this task, the state has not been too successful and has very often been a threat to life and property. In God's law, although life and property are protected, the primary purpose of his commandments is the kingdom of God and our dominion under him. God's law and man's law thus have sharply differing purposes. It is noteworthy that antinomians are usually ready to admit that the offences of Leviticus 20:10-21 are sins which are radically destructive of a society. What they object to in these laws, as in most, is the penalty. Just as they want God without thunder, so they want sin without penalties, a morally indefensible position. In verse 14, there is a reference to being burned with fire. This indicates cremation after execution, as in Joshua 7:25, in order to eliminate even the offender's body from the land. In verse 12, we are told of the act of incest. They have wrought confusion, which has been paraphrased by some as, they have committed an unnatural act. This rendering, however, stresses a departure from nature, whereas the text stresses the transgression of God's order. This is the key. The law protects God's life-giving order, whereas the sins which are cited lead only to death for any society. These laws do not call for a personal evaluation and judgment, but for our submission. God sets forth for us the ways of life and death, and leaves us without excuse.